Hello and welcome back. Once again, my name is Avery Clark, and today I'll be going over assignment 3. So far in our SQL programming, we've been making a database or not a database, but a system for a hotel and also a system for a Shopify. Today I'm going to start with the hotel system because it's a bit more in line with what we were doing in the last assignment. So first I made a guest table. Obviously, guest ID is going to be a primary key, and it's also going to auto number as well. I have a bunch of other columns with things like first name, last name, contact info, address, etc., all with their various data types. And then I also have the extra services table, service ID obviously being that primary key, that auto numbers as well, as you can see down here. Where does that go? Oh, here we go, right down here. And with their different columns and their different data types, as we went over in the last video. And let's say I want to add a guest. I've got a stored procedure saved called add a guest. If it'll let me open it. Ooh, buffering. Very nice. Just when I'm trying to record. Okay, there we go. We're going to modify this, take a peek inside. Obviously, it's using my database. We're altering this procedure. And here are the inputs, first name, last name, full name, etc., all with their various data type. In this case, it's actually all in varchar 50 because it's all going to be text-based. And then we have a quick data constraint. If it exists anywhere in the guest database, or the guest table, I should say, where in the full name column, a full name matches the full name input by the user, and also in the address column, an address matches the address put in by the user, then we print already have a customer with that name, and we stop running the program. Now, we could just say where full name equals full name, but then if there's two John Smiths, even though they're different people, you couldn't make two John Smiths. And if we just used address, then maybe two people in the same family who live in the same home, they couldn't both be customers. So we want to be really specific and use both. And then our insert statement, we're inserting these bits of data, or sorry, these bits of data down here that the user inputs into these columns. So each of these, it matches up with the corresponding column and is input by the user up top here. Then we have a select statement at the bottom just to show the data in the guest table and order it by guest ID. I'll go through a real quick example. Let's see, first name, Jim, last name, Smith. Lives at 146 Lane. Oh, that's supposed to go down here. Contact info, we'll just say jim@jim.com. Sure enough, pops up right there. No error messages. Looks good. All right. And if I want to add to the extra services, if I want to add an extra service, let me modify this. Very similar to the guests stored procedure. Again, using my data, we're altering this procedure. And here are the inputs, service name, description, price, etc., with their different data types in varchar for primarily letters, or I should say alphabet. And then price is numeric, so it can be added, subtracted, divided. And availability is a bit, so that's a 1 or a 0, a yes or a no, available or not available. And service hours, varchar again. And just like before, we're doing another data constraint. So if anywhere in the extra services table, specifically in the service name column, there is a service that is named the same as the one the user is trying to input, then we're going to say, sorry, we already have a service with that name, and we're going to quit running the program. But if that is not the case, we're going to insert into this table, specifically into these columns, this information, which we are getting from the user up top. And then we're just going to select to display that data. All right. Now I'm going to show an example of the data constraint in action, adopting us from sort of messing up our data integrity and adding something we shouldn't have added. So I'm going to try to add another guided hike. So let's add an extra service, execute, service name, guided hike, description, guided hike, price $1, whatever. It shouldn't work anyways because messages already have a service with that name. There you go. Data constraint in action. All right, let's move on to the Shopify system where we have added a customers table. So we have customer ID, primary key, obviously, that is going to be auto number as well. Right down here. And then we have all these different columns with data types, first name, last name, etc., all the way down. And if we would like to add to the customer table, we are going to go here. Oh, sorry, meant to click modify. Here we go, using my data. We're altering this procedure, name to add a customer, and first name, last name, full name, date of birth, etc. In varchar, mostly date of birth is going to be date. Everything else is in varchar. Another data constraint, if it exists in the customer's database, where someone's full name is equal to the full name the user is trying to input, and their date of birth is equal to this date of birth being input by the user, then we're going to say we already have a customer with that name, and we're going to stop running the program. Obviously, very similar to the hotel system, we want people with the same full names to be able to be customers, and we want people with the same birth dates to be able to be customers, but we probably don't want both of those to be true because that's probably the same person. Now, is that a foolproof system? Probably not, but it's the simplest way to do that. And obviously, if that does not exist, we're going to bypass it. And we're going to insert into the customer data table, specifically into these columns. We're going to insert this information provided by the user. And then another select statement just to display it. Alrighty, let's go ahead, execute that to add a customer. First name, Tina Johnson. Oh, there we go, incorrect syntax. Oh, let me see. I know what I did wrong. I did not put these in quotes. And there we go. Yeah, you got to put that date of birth in single quotes like that. Rookie mistake, but I am a rookie, so that does make sense. All right, so there we go. We've added her right up there. And now we will move on to the sales details, which is a much more complex table than the ones we've made so far. We have a two-part primary key, compound primary key, made up of sales ID and product ID. The thought process behind that being sales ID will appear twice, or sorry, multiple times, and product ID will also appear multiple times, but we do not want them to appear multiple times together. What that means is sale one is going to appear multiple times because there's multiple products, and product number one could appear in sale one and sale two, but we do not want product two to be in sale one multiple times. And let's see, product ID and sales ID are the primary keys, like I just said, but the product ID and the customer ID are going to be foreign keys, which can be seen if we look down here, these columns. Yep, so product ID and customer ID are going to be foreign keys. Product ID is obviously going to be the foreign key to the products table, customer ID to the customers table, because those are the primary keys in those tables. And then we have a bunch of other columns with their associated data types. And if I want to add to this sales details table, I'm going to go down here to my stored procedure, insert a line item. Now you'll notice I have like 4 of these. That's because I spent a bunch of hours trying to figure out how to make it work. I kept getting these error messages uh, that they were having problems converting data type in varchar to datetime, and they were failing to convert in varchar to the integer data type, specifically when I was typing true or false. I really tried to change that all up. I wrote it a bunch of different times, tried to figure that out. It didn't work at all. So I used some very specific prompting to an LLM to get some assistance, and they came up with a number of different solutions. And the one that seemed most straightforward was just to create some new local variables and sort of do it yourself. But I'll explain that when we get there. Again, it's using my data up here, and I called this procedure insert line item final. And we have our inputs, customer ID, product ID, units, new sale with their different data types. New sale and invoice date are in varchar now. And what I'm doing is I'm transferring these inputs into local variables that are date, time, and bit, which are sort of the corresponding data types that I actually need. And that starts right here. We're turning that new sale input, which is in varchar, into a bit, because the way that Featherman's code had it, I'm sure it was user error on my part, but I really could not figure out how to get that to work. And I kept getting the error that they were having a problem converting. So this is sort of a workaround. Basically, we're saying this is sort of a conditional statement with this input. So when the new sale input is true, then we are setting the isNewSale local variable to 1 for the bit. And when it's the case that it is false, then we're setting that to the bit value of 0. So we just basically turn it into a bit. And if it's not either of those, if it's not true or false, then we say it's null. And if it is null, then we're going to print new sale must be true or false only. Featherman's code does a very similar thing, but just in a different way. And then same thing with the date and time. So the local variable invoice date, date time, basically this function trycast, we just take this invoice date and we try to trycast it as date time, which basically just means we're taking the invoice date data, which is an in varchar, and they're basically just trying to like smash it into the date time data type using this format. So if it doesn't work, it just comes out as null. If it does work, which it should if you type it in correctly, then it just swaps to date time. And if it is null because you typed it in a format that is not compatible with date time, when it tries to sort of just like smash the in varchar into the date time mold, then it's going to say invalid invoice date, use this format. And it's going to quit running the program. And for determining sales ID, it's slightly different because, again, I used the isNewSale local variable. So if it's 1, which means it's true because it's a bit, true, false, 1, 0, then we're going to set the sales ID to select the maximum sales ID from the sales details table and add 1. So basically that just means if there are 5 sales IDs, sales ID 5 is going to be the highest. You add 1 because this is now the 6th sale. If that is not the case, then we're just going to set it to the highest sales ID because obviously we're still adding to that sale. So again, if there's 5, then we're just going to continue to be in sale 5, adding new items to the sale. And then for validating customer ID from here on down, it's extremely similar to Featherman's code. Basically, we're saying if anywhere in the customers table, specifically in the customer ID column, there is a customer ID that is the same as the input, the one input by the user, we're going to say good, that's a valid customer ID. Otherwise, we are going to say, you got to check the customer ID, the program stopped, and we quit running, because that means if it is not the same as a customer ID in that table, it's invalid. You should create a customer ID first before you allow them to proceed. And very similar with the product ID, we got to validate that, another data constraint. Again, if it exists in the products table where there's a product ID that's the same as the one we input, that is good, because that means product ID is valid. Otherwise, this else statement, we're going to print check product ID list, program stopped, and then return to stop the program. It's basically just saying, hey, you put in a product ID 10, there is no product ID 10. We don't want you to be able to sell a product that exists. That does not exist, I should say. Similar to up top, it's you put in customer ID 10, there is no customer ID 10. We do not want you to sell to a customer that doesn't exist, just to maintain data integrity. And then this is another constraint to see if it's already on the invoice. So if we're looking into the sales details table, and there's a product ID that matches the product ID, and a sales ID that matches the sales ID together, then we're going to say product's already on invoice, program stopped. Again, that's just saying, like I said earlier, we want product ID and sales ID both need to be able to repeat, but they should not be able to be repeated together. So you cannot sell the same product multiple times, multiple different times in the same sale. In other words, you can buy two pieces of gum, but you have to buy them at once. You can't buy one piece of gum and then another piece of gum, if that makes any sense. And then here we're checking the stock. We set the quantity in stock by basically looking into the stock quantity in the products table based on the product ID. Let me explain that a little bit more succinctly. So basically, they go into the products table and they look into the stock quantity for each product ID. So based on the input product ID, if I say 10, they're going to say, okay, let's go into that table. We look at ID 10 and we look under the stock quantity column and we retrieve that stock quantity and we make it the local variable. And so now we're saying if that number that they find and set as the local variable is equal to 0, then we're going to say, sorry, no stock, and we're going to stop the program. If it is less than the number of units requested, then we're going to say, insufficient stock, there are only this many. So we're going to convert the in varchar quantity in stock. Oh, sorry, we're going to convert quantity in stock to in varchar because quantity in stock would be a numeric. But we want to put it in like sort of type format. So we're converting it into in varchar. Units in stock for the product. We're saying there's this many units in stock for the product. So quantity's been reduced to this number. And then we're going to set the units requested to the quantity in stock so that you cannot sell more units than the quantity available. Okay. Here we're setting the product name and the sales price because we don't want the person who's like operating the point of sale system to be able to either maliciously or unintentionally sort of mess this up. So we're just retrieving the product name, which is the local variable, from the from the products table. Specifically, we are using, similarly to a couple lines of code ago, we're going to look at the product ID that's been input, and we're going to correspond it to the product ID in the column. And we're going to look for the product name that corresponds to this product ID. And we're going to set that to local variable. Same thing for sales price. You look at the product ID, you go to the product ID that is correspondent to the one the user input in the products table. And from there, you retrieve the sales price and set that as the local variable. And then we get down here to this statement, which sort of works in tandem with this statement down here to sort of count up the number of items. So we go into the sales details table and we count up the number of integers. So we're basically just counting up the number of line items, the number of products, and then you insert the new line item, and then afterwards you subtract the count of line items before from the count of line items after. So basically, if there's more after, then you know you've increased by adding a line item, so therefore you'd print this. But yeah, so standard insert statement, inserting these. based on these values down here. Sales ID with sales ID, product ID with product ID, and then some of these date part, date name, etc., are sort of calculated based off the invoice date. And then, like I said, we see if there's more line items after than before, and then we say, oh, line item added, and then we're going to update the products table with all these different columns by adding or subtracting. So for example, stock quantity, obviously if you sell two, that's 2 units, stock quantity goes down, so subtract. The last sale date is going to be the date of this sale. Total units sold, add that. Revenue, units sold times the sales price. Profit is just going to be that times your profit margin. Yeah. And then if that is not the case, if it is not the case that there's another line item, then necessarily that means that a line item has not been added, so you can print that. And then I will do some examples just for the sake of time, because this is going to be a horribly long video. I'm just going to do one where it works and one where it doesn't. So customer ID, let's say, well, let me double check that I have a correct customer ID. Okay, we're going to do 1002. Customer 1002 is going to order product 1008. It's going to be bookshelf. He's going to order 1 unit. New sale. Well, actually, we'll say false because he was the last customer. So we'll add to that invoice date, which was 2025-07-09. And because that's in varchar, I don't actually need to put it in the single quotes. And let's look really quickly into the products table to see how many of 1008 there are. You're going to see 1008 has 8 in stock right now. That number should go down, obviously. We're going to execute this. Valid, valid, line item added. Very nice. So we're going to go to sales details. Top 200. There we go. So it's the same sales ID because I said false. Same customer, different product, coffee table. And that should also have updated the products table, which sure enough it has. Stock quantity has gone down to 7. And so now we have sold 3 total, and it's added to our revenue and our profits. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to do one more example where it goes wrong. So here we go. Okay, I'm going to say correct customer, but a product ID that doesn't exist. New sale, state, and okay. And yep, our data constraint has worked effectively. Customer ID is invalid. Check product ID list. This is great because the program doesn't just stop. It tells you where to look. It tells you what you got wrong. So you can know, oh, well, that product ID doesn't exist. Let me go look. But yeah, for the sake of time, I think I'm going to cut it off there. Thank you so much for listening.